Sleepovers were always a blast, especially during the summer when we had no school to worry about and could stay up as late as we wanted. This particular sleepover was at my friend Khloe's house, which was known for its spacious backyard and a small, cozy gazebo where we planned to hang out most of the night. We arrived at Khloe's place in the late afternoon, our bags filled with snacks, blankets, and games. Her parents were kind enough to set up the gazebo with fairy lights, and there was a fire pit nearby for making s'mores later. The evening started off perfectly. We played a few rounds of Uno, shared some ghost stories, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the yard, we decided it was time for a spooky game of hide-and-seek. Khloe's backyard was the perfect setting, with plenty of bushes, trees, and even a small garden shed to hide in. We drew straws to see who would be it, and I ended up with the shortest one. "All right, I'm counting to 50, I said, turning my back to the gazebo and covering my eyes. 1, 2, 3. The others scattered, giggling as they ran off to find the best hiding spots. I counted slowly, the anticipation building with each number. When I finally reached 50, I called out, "Ready or not, here I come." I started my search around the gazebo, checking behind the bushes and under the picnic table. I found Bailey first, her foot sticking out from behind a tree. "Got you," I said, tapping her on the shoulder. She laughed and joined me in the search. We found Arthur next, hiding in the garden shed. The door creaked loudly as I opened it, and he jumped out, pretending to be a ghost. We all laughed and continued looking for Khloe and Olivia, who were proving to be expert hiders. As we searched, the night grew darker, and the sounds of the neighborhood quieted down. The only noise was the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze and the chirping of crickets. The fairy lights cast a soft glow around the gazebo, but the further we moved away from it, the darker it got. We found Khloe hiding behind a stack of firewood near the edge of the yard. She joined us, and we continued looking for Olivia, who was the last one left to be found. "Olivia, come out, wherever you are," we called, but there was no response. We checked all the usual spots, behind the garden shed, under the deck, and even in the trees, but she was nowhere to be found. The game that had started off so fun was beginning to feel unsettling. "Maybe she went inside," Arthur suggested. We headed to the house and checked the living room, the kitchen, and even upstairs in Khloe's bedroom. But there was no sign of Olivia. "She wouldn't just leave without telling us," Khloe said, worry creeping into her voice. We returned to the backyard, our flashlights in hand, and resumed our search. The yard felt different now, the playful atmosphere replaced by an eerie stillness. We called out for Olivia again, but our voices sounded small and insignificant in the darkness. Suddenly, we heard a faint sound, like someone crying. We followed the noise to the far corner of the yard, near a patch of overgrown bushes. As we approached, the crying grew louder, more desperate. "Olivia?" I called out, my heart pounding in my chest. There was a rustling sound, and then we saw her. Olivia was sitting on the ground, her knees pulled up to her chest, and tears streaming down her face. She looked terrified. "Olivia, what's wrong?" Khloe asked, rushing to her side. Olivia looked up at us, her eyes wide with fear. "I saw someone," she whispered. "There was a man in the bushes. He was watching us." We exchanged uneasy glances, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. "Are you sure?" I asked, shining my flashlight around the area. "Yes," Olivia insisted. "He was right there. He had this creepy smile, and he didn't say anything. He just watched me." We scanned the bushes and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of anyone. The fear in Olivia's voice was real, though, and it sent chills down my spine. "Let's go inside," Khloe said. "We can call my parents and let them know." We hurried back to the house, locking the doors behind us. Khloe's parents were out for the evening, so we decided to call the non-emergency police line to report the incident. The dispatcher assured us they would send a patrol car to check the area. We huddled together in the living room, trying to shake off the fear. The police arrived within minutes and did a thorough search of the yard and the surrounding neighborhood but found nothing. They told us it was probably just a prank or someone passing through. Despite their reassurances, the rest of the night was tense. We decided to stay inside, watching movies and trying to keep our minds off the incident. But every little noise made us jump, and we kept glancing out the windows, half expecting to see the mysterious man again. As the hours passed, exhaustion finally caught up with us, and we drifted off to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. It was a soft tapping, like someone was knocking on the window. I sat up, my heart racing, and looked around. The room was dark, and the only light came from the moon outside. I glanced at the window and froze. There, silhouetted against the glass, was the figure of a man. He was standing just outside, his face pressed against the window, and that same creepy smile stretched across his face. I stifled a scream and shook Khloe awake. "Khloe, wake up," I whispered urgently. She rubbed her eyes and looked where I was pointing. Her face went pale, and she quickly woke the others. We all stared at the figure, too scared to move or make a sound. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. We sat there, too frightened to go back to sleep, until the first light of dawn finally broke through the windows. In the morning, we told Khloe's parents what had happened. They called the police again, but there were no signs of the man anywhere. The officers told us to be cautious and keep an eye out for anything unusual. We packed up our things and left Khloe's house, all of us feeling a sense of relief to be going home. The sleepover that had started off as a fun celebration had turned into a night of terror that we would never forget. Even now, I can't shake the image of that man from my mind. The way he watched us, his creepy smile, and the fact that he could be out there somewhere, waiting for another chance to scare someone else. It made me realize how vulnerable we can be, even in the places where we feel the safest. From that night on, I always made sure to lock the doors and windows and to be extra cautious when staying at a friend's house. Because you never know when a harmless sleepover could turn into a real-life nightmare. It was my friend Mia's birthday, and she had invited a bunch of us over for a sleepover at her house in the suburbs. It was the middle of summer, and we were all excited for a night of games, movies, and laughter. Mia's house was perfect for a sleepover. It had a big living room, a spacious backyard, and plenty of space for everyone to sleep. We arrived at Mia's house in the early evening. Her parents were hosting a small barbecue in the backyard, and the smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs filled the air. We spent the first few hours outside, eating, playing games, and enjoying the warm evening. As the sun began to set, we moved inside to start the sleepover activities. Mia's living room was decorated with balloons and streamers, and there was a table full of snacks and drinks. We spread out our sleeping bags and settled in for the night. We started with some board games, then moved on to watching a scary movie. The atmosphere was light and fun, with lots of laughter and joking around. As the movie ended, Mia suggested we play a game of truth or dare. We all agreed, and the game started off with harmless questions and silly dares. But as the night went on, the dares became more daring, and the questions more personal. We were all having a great time, pushing each other's limits and laughing at the ridiculous challenges. It was around midnight when things started to take a strange turn. It was my turn, and I chose dare. Mia grinned mischievously and dared me to go into the basement and bring back one of the old dolls her mom kept down there. I hesitated for a moment. Mia's basement was known to be creepy, but I didn't want to back down from the dare. Armed with a flashlight, I made my way to the basement door. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The basement was cold and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes. I scanned the room with my flashlight, looking for the dolls. I found them on a dusty shelf in the corner, their glassy eyes staring back at me. I reached for one of the dolls, feeling a shiver run down my spine. As I picked it up, I heard a faint sound behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination and hurried back upstairs, eager to rejoin the others. When I returned to the living room, everyone cheered, and Mia took the doll from me, placing it on a side table. We continued with the game, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me in the basement. The next few rounds went by uneventfully, but then it was Mia's turn again. She chose truth, and Owen asked her if she believed in ghosts. Mia paused for a moment, then nodded. "My mom told me a story once," she said. "She said that when we first moved into this house, she would hear strange noises at night. She thought it was just the house settling, but then she started seeing things. Shadows moving, doors opening and closing on their own. She believed the house was haunted." We all listened in rapt silence, the fun atmosphere replaced by a growing sense of unease. Mia's story had set a somber tone, and we decided to take a break from the game. We settled into our sleeping bags, talking quietly and trying to shake off the creepy feeling. It was around 2 a.m. when I was jolted awake by a loud noise. I sat up, my heart pounding, and looked around. Everyone else was still asleep, except for Mia, who was also sitting up, looking just as startled as I was. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, straining to listen. The house was silent, but then I heard it again, a loud thump, like something heavy had fallen. It was coming from the basement. Mia and I exchanged worried glances, and she reached for her flashlight. "Let's go check it out," she said, her voice shaking slightly. We got up quietly, trying not to wake the others, and made our way to the basement door. The flashlight beam danced over the walls as we descended the stairs. The basement was just as I had left it, with the dolls still on the shelf. But something felt different, like the air was thicker, heavier. We searched the basement, but found nothing out of place. Just as we were about to head back upstairs, we heard another noise, a soft, shuffling sound, like footsteps. The flashlight flickered, and Mia's grip on my arm tightened. "Let's get out of here," I whispered, and we hurried back upstairs, locking the basement door behind us. We returned to the living room, trying to act normal, but the unease lingered. We didn't tell the others what had happened, not wanting to scare them. We decided to stay up for the rest of the night, keeping the lights on and talking quietly. Around 3 a.m., we heard it again, the soft shuffling sound, but this time it was coming from the living room. We all froze, staring at the source of the noise. The doll I had brought up from the basement was now sitting in the middle of the room, its glassy eyes fixed on us. "Who moved the doll?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. We were all too scared to speak. The shuffling sound continued, and we realized it was coming from the doll. It moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to send a wave of terror through us. I grabbed the doll, intending to throw it back in the basement, but as soon as I touched it, I felt a cold, clammy sensation, like I was holding something alive. I dropped it immediately, and it landed on the floor with a soft thud. "We need to get rid of it," Owen said, his voice trembling. take it outside." Mia opened the front door, and I picked up the doll again, this time using a towel to avoid touching it directly. We hurried outside and threw the doll into the bushes, then quickly went back inside, locking the door behind us. The rest of the night passed in a tense, uneasy silence. None of us slept, and we kept the lights on, watching the windows and listening for any more noises. Morning finally came, and we packed up our things, eager to leave. As we were getting ready to go, Mia's mom came downstairs, surprised to see us all awake so early. "Did you girls have fun?" she asked, noticing the tired expressions on our faces. We nodded, not wanting to worry her. But as we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us, lurking in the shadows of the house. It wasn't until we were driving away that Mia told us her mom's story in full. She had never told us the ending before. According to her mom, the previous owners of the house had a daughter who went missing one night. They searched everywhere, but she was never found. Some say she still haunts the house, looking for a way back to her family. I glanced back at the house one last time as we drove away, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the window, watching us leave. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. But deep down, I knew I would never forget the eerie events of that night and the feeling that we were never truly alone in that house. When I was 16, my friends and I decided to spend a weekend at a remote cabin in the woods. It was the middle of summer, and we were looking forward to a few days of camping, bonfires, and ghost stories. The cabin belonged to my friend Tom's family, and it was the perfect setting for an adventurous sleepover. Nestled deep in the forest, it was isolated, quiet, and far from the noise and distractions of the city. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the sun still high in the sky. The drive up was uneventful, and we spent the first few hours exploring the area around the cabin. There was a small lake nearby, and we took a quick dip to cool off. The water was refreshing, and the air was filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Everything seemed perfect. As the sun began to set, we gathered around the fire pit outside the cabin, roasting marshmallows and telling jokes. Tom's dad had left us with plenty of supplies, including a cooler full of drinks and snacks. We were all in high spirits, laughing and enjoying each other's company. The sky turned from orange to purple, and finally to a deep, star-speckled black. We decided to start telling ghost stories as the fire crackled and the shadows grew longer. Tom went first, spinning a tale about a haunted lighthouse. We all listened intently, the flickering firelight casting eerie shapes on our faces. After Tom, it was my turn. I recounted a story my grandmother used to tell me about a cursed mirror. By the time it was Ethan's turn, the air was thick with suspense. Ethan's story was about a local legend, a tale he had heard from his older brother. It was about a hermit who lived in these very woods many years ago. According to the legend, the hermit had gone mad and started kidnapping people who ventured too close to his cabin. He would imprison them in his basement, and they were never seen again. The story was chilling, and as Ethan spoke, I couldn't help but glance nervously at the dark woods surrounding us. "Do you think any of it's true?" I asked, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the slight tremor in my voice. "Probably just a story to scare kids," Tom replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. We decided to call it a night after that, the fire dying down to glowing embers. We moved inside the cabin, the interior lit only by our flashlights and a single oil lamp Tom had brought. The cabin was cozy but old, with creaky floorboards and walls adorned with hunting trophies and rustic decorations. Tom and I shared one of the two bedrooms, while Ethan and Dylan took the other. We had planned to stay up late playing card games, but the ghost stories had taken the wind out of our sails. We ended up talking quietly for a while before drifting off to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, a faint, rhythmic tapping. I glanced over at Tom, who was still asleep, then checked my phone. It was 2:33 a.m. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. I got out of bed, trying not to make any noise. The floorboards creaked under my feet as I made my way to the window. I peered outside, but the darkness was impenetrable. The tapping seemed to be coming from the front of the cabin. I felt a chill run down my spine, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and tiptoed out of the room. The main room of the cabin was eerily silent. I could hear the steady breathing of Ethan and Dylan from the other bedroom. The tapping was louder now, definitely coming from outside. I took a deep breath and unlocked the front door, opening it just enough to slip through. The night air was cool, and the forest was deathly silent. I shone my flashlight around, but couldn't see anything unusual. The tapping had stopped. I stepped out onto the porch, feeling the wooden planks creak under my weight. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. The figure didn't move or respond. It just stood there, watching me. I felt a surge of fear, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a step back, and the figure took a step forward, moving into the light. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. His clothes were tattered, and his face was pale and gaunt. His eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to suck in the light. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed directly at me. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, and I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. I scrambled back into the cabin, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock. I ran back to the bedroom and shook Tom awake. "What's wrong?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "There's someone outside," I whispered urgently. "We need to wake the others." Tom's eyes widened, and he sat up quickly. We roused Ethan and Dylan, explaining what had happened. They looked as scared as I felt, but we knew we had to do something. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find, a fireplace poker, a kitchen knife, and a heavy flashlight. Then we gathered in the main room, listening for any signs of the stranger. Minutes passed, but there was no sound. No tapping, no footsteps, nothing. We began to relax, thinking maybe it had just been my imagination. But then we heard it, a slow, deliberate knock on the front door. We all froze, staring at the door. "Maybe it's just someone lost in the woods," Ethan suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Tom took a deep breath and stepped forward, gripping the fireplace poker tightly. He motioned for us to stay back and slowly unlocked the door. He opened it just a crack, peering outside. "There's no one there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We all exchanged nervous glances. Tom opened the door wider, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The porch was empty. He stepped outside, and we followed, staying close together. The clearing was empty, the forest silent. There was no sign of the man I had seen. We searched the area around the cabin, but found nothing. No footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. We went back inside, locking the door behind us and piling furniture against it for good measure. None of us slept for the rest of the night, huddled together in the main room with our makeshift weapons. Morning came slowly, the first light of dawn filtering through the windows. We packed up our things quickly, eager to leave the cabin and the eerie events of the night behind. As we drove away, I glanced back at the cabin, half expecting to see the stranger standing there, watching us. But there was nothing. We never went back to that cabin again. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I can't help but wonder who, or what, the man was, and why he had chosen to visit us. I'll never forget the hollow look in his eyes, or the sense of dread that had filled me when he pointed at me. It was a sleepover I would never forget, for all the wrong reasons. I had been looking forward to the sleepover at my friend Daniel's house for weeks. It was the last weekend before school started again, and we wanted to make the most of it. Daniel's house was an old Victorian-style home, large and full of character. The kind of house where every floorboard creaked and every gust of wind seemed to whisper secrets through the walls. We planned to play video games, watch horror movies, and stay up all night telling ghost stories. Daniel's parents were going out for the night, leaving us with the house to ourselves. They had ordered pizza for us before they left, and we were sitting in the living room, devouring it while arguing over which movie to watch first. The mood was light, filled with the kind of laughter that only comes from being with your closest friends. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, we finally settled on a classic horror movie. Daniel dimmed the lights, and we huddled together under a blanket, eyes glued to the screen. The movie was filled with jump scares and eerie music, perfect for setting the mood for our sleepover. Halfway through the movie, I thought I heard a noise coming from upstairs. It was faint, like a door creaking open or someone moving around. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the old house settling. But a few minutes later, I heard it again, louder this time. I glanced at Daniel, who seemed to be focused on the movie, and decided not to say anything. No need to ruin the fun over some creaky floorboards. We finished the movie and moved on to playing video games. The noise from upstairs had stopped, and I had almost forgotten about it. We were immersed in a heated match when the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. This time, everyone heard it. We paused the game and looked at each other, wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, it sounded like someone walking upstairs," I replied, my heart beginning to race. "Probably just the house," another friend, Mark, suggested, trying to sound confident. "Old houses make weird noises." But we all knew that wasn't the case. The footsteps had been too deliberate, too human. We sat in silence for a moment, listening intently. The footsteps came again, this time moving from one end of the house to the other. "I'm going to check it out," Daniel said, standing up and grabbing a flashlight. "Who's coming with me?" Reluctantly, Mark and I stood up. The rest of our friends stayed in the living room, too scared to move. We crept up the stairs, the flashlight beam shaking slightly as Daniel led the way. The house was eerily silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath our feet. We reached the top of the stairs and paused, listening. The footsteps had stopped, and all we could hear was the sound of our own breathing. Daniel moved forward, slowly opening the door to his parents' bedroom. It was empty, just as we expected. We checked the other rooms one by one, each one empty and undisturbed. Finally, we reached the last room at the end of the hall. It was a small guest room that Daniel's family rarely used. Daniel opened the door, and we all peered inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon shining through the window. At first, it seemed empty like the others. But then we saw it, a figure standing in the corner, facing the wall. My heart felt like it stopped in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Who's there?" Daniel demanded, his voice shaking. The figure didn't move or respond. It just stood there, eerily still. Daniel took a step forward, shining the flashlight directly at it. That's when we saw the face, a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes staring back at us. The figure smiled, a slow, sinister smile that sent chills down my spine. We all screamed and bolted out of the room, nearly tripping over each other in our rush to get downstairs. We burst into the living room, startling our friends. "There's someone in the house," Daniel shouted, grabbing the phone to call the police. We huddled together, waiting for the police to arrive. Every creak and groan of the house made us jump, our nerves on edge. The police arrived quickly, and we watched as they searched the house from top to bottom. They found no one. The guest room was empty, just as we had left it. The police assured us that there was no sign of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been in the house besides us. But we knew what we had seen. That face, that sinister smile, was burned into our minds. Daniel's parents came home shortly after the police left. We tried to explain what had happened, but they seemed skeptical, thinking it was just our imaginations running wild after watching a horror movie. But we knew the truth. There had been someone in the house with us, someone who vanished without a trace. None of us slept that night. We stayed together in the living room, every noise making us jump. The sleepover that was supposed to be fun and carefree had turned into a nightmare we would never forget. From that day on, I was always cautious about sleepovers. The thought of that stranger in the house still haunts me, and I can't help but wonder who, or what, they were, and where they disappeared to that night.